My husband slapped me in front of 412 people. I know the number because I counted the place settings myself that morning, walking the Meridian Hotel ballroom at 8 o'clock in the particular quiet of a room that doesn't yet know what it's going to hold. 412 chairs, 412 centerpieces, each one built around a photograph from our 11 years of marriage, pressed flat under glass. I paid for all of it. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the custom glasswork. $68,000 out of my own savings because I wanted the night to be perfect, and because at the time I still believed perfect was something I owed him. At 9:47 that Saturday night, in front of every important person in both our lives, my husband raised his right hand and brought it across my face hard enough that I stumbled backward into the table behind me and knocked a centerpiece to the floor. The glass broke. The room went silent. Then 30 people laughed. He straightened his jacket. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he has planned for a long time and finds, in the moment, behaves exactly as he expected it to. He said, "Sit down, Diana." I did not sit down. I walked to the exit, my hand against my cheek, my ears ringing under 412 pairs of eyes, and I want to tell you 3 things before I tell you anything else, because you're going to need them to make sense of what comes next. My father was already in the parking lot when it happened. He had been there for 3 hours. There was an envelope inside his jacket, and it had been there since before the appetizers were served. And when I called him, 30 seconds after I hit the corridor, he answered on the second ring already saying, "I'm on my way," before I had said a single word. My name is Diana Calloway Reeves. I was 52 years old that night, a financial analyst with 16 years in corporate finance, most of them spent finding the places where numbers didn't add up and asking, politely and relentlessly, why not? I had been married to Charles Reeves for 11 years. I had co-founded, in every sense but the legal one, the consulting business that bore only his name. And until the second I felt his hand against my face, I believed, with the specific, expensive confidence of a woman who is good at her job, that I understood my own life better than almost anyone. I want to tell you what I've learned since then, because it is the kind of thing that changes how you see everyone you love. It is possible to be extremely good at reading a balance sheet and catastrophically bad at reading a marriage. Both of those things were true about me for 11 years, right up until the night the glass broke. I'm going to tell you what happened in that ballroom after I left it, because I wasn't there for it. Not really. I was in the corridor with my hand against my face, but I've since had it told to me by 6 different people who were, and their versions agree on everything that matters. The silence after the slap lasted about 15 seconds. Then a woman named Catherine Webb, sitting at table 3, said loud enough for 3 tables to hear it clearly, "Someone should go after her." Her husband put a hand on her arm. She took it off. A man at table 9, a client of Charles's whose name I didn't learn until he called me 6 days later, half rose from his chair and then sat back down, because standing felt too public and sitting felt wrong, and he ended up in the middle of both and hated himself for it. I have thought about that moment every day since. He told me on the phone, and I believed him, because I have thought about mine too. The photographer I'd hired for the evening, a young woman named Lena, her 3rd large event, her first time seeing anything like this, lowered her camera and did not raise it again for the rest of the night. She emailed me the following week. "Asterisk, I don't know if you remember me, but I was there, and I want you to know I am so sorry I didn't do anything." Asterisk, I remembered her. Charles looked around the room the way a man looks at a fire he started and is now timing. He picked up his glass. He said, to no one and to everyone, in the easy, rehearsed voice that had carried him through every room of his professional life, "She's had a difficult few months. We've both had a difficult few months. I apologize for the scene." The scene, as though I had made it, as though he were the one left to clean up after someone else's mess. A woman at table 7, Renata Cole, my closest friend for 9 years, said, just as loudly, "That is not what happened." Charles looked at her. She held his gaze. He looked away first. Near the back wall, a man named Marcus Webb stood with a folder tucked inside his jacket, watching Charles with the stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular piece of information and has just received it. He wasn't smiling. He was filing something away. Charles's assistant, a young man named Brendan Choi, moved toward him and said something low. Charles shook his head. Brendan stepped back. The hotel staff had the frozen look of people trained for 100 emergencies who had landed in the one their training didn't cover. The catering manager stood near the service doors with a radio in her hand she never turned on. The pianist in the corner had stopped playing. His hands sat in his lap. He was looking at the floor. At table 1, closest to the head table, Joanna Hale sat very still with her wine glass halfway to her mouth, and later told me she remembered thinking, with a clarity that frightened her a little, that she was watching a man make a decision about his own future in real time and getting it catastrophically wrong. She didn't say anything that night. She told me, months afterward, that the not saying anything was the thing she regretted most about the whole evening, more than the voicemail she'd later have to play back for a room full of attorneys, and that she'd promised herself, sitting there with her glass still raised, that she would never again mistake silence for neutrality. And then my father stood up. He rose from table 4 with the specific quality of motion I have tried many times to describe and never quite managed, a man moving with no hurry and total purpose at once. He didn't look at Charles. He didn't look at the room. He folded his napkin, set it beside his plate, picked his jacket off the back of his chair, and walked toward the exit. Through the center of the room, not along the edges. And as he crossed it, something happened that 3 separate people described to me afterward in 3 different sets of words that all meant the same thing. The room reorganized itself around him. Conversations that had begun to resume went quiet again. People turned. And Charles, who had been rebuilding his composure at the bar, turned too, and watched my father walk through his ballroom toward his exit. Catherine Webb called me 8 days later and said the thing I've never forgotten. It was the first time all night he looked like a man who didn't know what came next. My father pushed through the exit doors. In the corridor, my phone rang in my hand. I answered it. "Dad, I'm already in the car." He was in the lobby in 4 minutes, which told me he'd been somewhere close. He walked straight to me, put both hands on my shoulders, and studied my face. "Are you hurt?" "Not seriously." "All right." He stepped back, looked at me a moment longer, then reached inside his jacket. I saw the gesture, a brief press of his hand against the inside panel, checking something was still there, and he straightened the jacket again. "What is that?" "Tonight we get you out of here," he said. "Tomorrow I'll show you." "Show me now." "Diana." He said my name the way he said it my whole life when a decision is finished, not as a diminishment but as a fact. Asterisk, this is who you are, and I'm not arguing with her. Asterisk, tomorrow. I looked at him. "You were expecting this." "I was prepared for it." "That's not the same as not expecting it." He didn't answer that. He put his arm around my shoulders and walked me to the exit, and I let him, because my legs had started to understand what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. That I'd been struck in front of 412 people. The glass had broken. 30 people had laughed. And the rest of my life was not going to unfold the way I'd planned it that morning while I counted centerpieces. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I want to stop here and tell you a little about my father, because you're going to need to understand him to understand anything that happens after this. His name is Walter Calloway. He is 78 years old. For 31 years, he was a special agent with the FBI, most of that time in the Financial Crimes Division, chasing men who built elaborate structures to move money in directions the law didn't allow. He retired 9 years ago. He plays golf badly on purpose, because he says a man who plays golf too well gets asked to join committees. He has grown tomatoes in the same 6 raised beds since before my mother died, 27 years ago, and he still puts in exactly as many plants as she used to, no more, no fewer. He is not a dramatic man. He has never in my memory raised his voice. He has a way of being quiet that makes other people's noise sound foolish, and I have watched grown men, attorneys, executives, once even a United States attorney at a dinner party, adjust their own volume downward without noticing they were doing it, just to match him. What I did not fully understand, that Saturday night, was that this quiet, patient man had spent the last 4 years of my marriage watching my husband, the way he used to watch people whose business it was his job to understand, and that he had spent the last 7 months of it building a file. He opened the passenger door of his car. I got in. He walked around, sat, started the engine. And that's when I saw it, the edge of the envelope, pale against the dark fabric of his jacket, just visible where the lapel had shifted. I reached across and put my hand on his lapel. He covered my hand with his. "Tomorrow," he said. His voice was quiet in a way that wasn't forbidding. It was older than forbidding. I looked at the envelope. I looked at his face. He was watching the parking lot, not moving his hand until I moved mine. I moved mine. He put the car in reverse. We drove without talking for a few minutes. The city was doing what cities do on a Saturday night, moving through itself, oblivious, lit up, someone laughing outside a restaurant about something that wasn't this. "How long were you in that parking lot?" I asked. "Let's get you home first." "Answer the question." He signaled a turn. "I was there when the dinner started." "The dinner started at 7. "Yes." "It was 10:15. 3 hours," I said. "Something like that." "You sat in a parking lot for 3 hours and didn't come inside." "No." "Why?" "Tomorrow, Diana." Finished again. I watched the city slide past the window. "Is it bad?" He was quiet for a moment. "It's recoverable." "That's no." "No," he said. "It's no." We didn't talk the rest of the way. At his house, he made tea, which I didn't want, and put it in front of me anyway, because he believes hot things in your hands help with shock whether you want them to or not. I wrapped my hands around the mug, and he sat across from me and told me to sleep, and I told him I couldn't, and he said try, and I said, "Dad, what's in the envelope?" He looked at me a long time. "The truth," he said. "About the marriage, about the money, about what's been built and how." "How long have you known?" "I've suspected for a long time. I've been able to document it for 7 months. 7 months. I sat with that number the way you sit with a number that's about to change the shape of everything around it. You've known for 7 months, and you didn't. I documented it for 7 months. Before that, I watched. I watched for longer." "How much longer?" "Tomorrow," he said. "I promise you all of it in order tomorrow. Tonight I need you to sleep." I looked at him. He held my gaze with the steadiness he's always held it, the steadiness of a man who's decided what's right and doesn't waver from it. And underneath that steadiness, for just a second, something he was trying very hard not to let me see, which was what it had cost him to wait this long to tell me. I've always been able to see the things he tries not to show me. It's the one advantage of having grown up watched over by a man who studies people for a living. You learn, eventually, to study him back. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow. I'll be here when you wake up." I lay in the dark in his guest room and thought about 3 hours in a parking lot, and an envelope in a jacket, and a man who had been watching for longer than 7 months, and who had said asterisk, "It's recoverable asterisk," in the tone of someone who has already mapped the whole road from where we were to somewhere better. I thought about the glass breaking. I thought about the 30 people laughing. I thought about the way the room had organized itself around my father when he walked through it. Eventually, I slept. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the morning, the light through the curtains had the gray, undecided quality of an October day that hasn't made up its mind. I lay still and listened. My father was in the kitchen. I could hear the percolator he's had since before I was born, making it sound like something slowly building toward a conclusion, and under it the specific, patient sounds of a man who has been up for hours and is waiting without impatience, because waiting without impatience is one of the things he does best in this world. I got up. I put on the cardigan he'd left on the chair for me. He always anticipates what you'll need before you know you need it, and walked to the kitchen. He turned when I came in. He looked at my face. "How did you sleep?" "Well enough." "Sit down." I sat. He poured coffee, set it in front of me, and sat across the table. Between us, already open, was the envelope. Not sealed, open, its contents arranged in the order he'd decided was right, tabbed, organized. He'd been up since before I woke, building the sequence of what he was about to show me, and then he'd waited for me to be ready for it. "I'm going to show you these in order," he said. "Look at each one before I explain it. Take as long as you need." All right. He set the first document down. A business filing, State of Delaware. A limited liability company called Reeves Capital Holdings, LLC. Incorporated 7 years ago, 18 months into my marriage. Sole member, Charles Reeves. I don't know this company, I said. No. Charles has a separate company. He has several. He placed the second document down. A bank statement for that same LLC, 18 months of activity. I ran my eye down the deposits and recognized one of them immediately, $240,000, received from the consultancy's operating account the same month I'd wired my personal investment into that account. This is my money, I said. I invested in the consultancy. The consultancy moved it into a company I've never heard of, that Charles owns alone. Yes, I've seen the consultancy's books, multiple times. I would have seen a transfer like that. He set down the third document, a forensic reconciliation prepared by an accounting firm I didn't recognize, comparing two versions of the consultancy's books. The version I'd been shown, and a second, more complete version I hadn't. I am a financial analyst. I understand exactly what it means when a company keeps two sets of records. He kept two books, I said. My father said nothing. He showed me one of them. My father said nothing. I looked at the line items that differed, at the accounts that existed in one version and not the other, at the transfers to Reeves Capital Holdings, LLC, present in the true records, invisible in the ones I'd trusted. How many companies? I finally said. 3, I'll show you. He laid out the next 3 filings. 3 entities, 3 incorporation dates, each one within 2 months of a significant financial event in our marriage. The first right after my initial investment, the second after I co-signed the business line of credit, the third after we refinanced our mortgage in year 5. 3 moments where I had made money available. 3 companies built to quietly receive a portion of it. I sat back. He built an architecture. Yes. Around me, with my capital, my credit, my income. Yes. And never told me any of it existed. Yes. I looked at the ceiling, then out the window at my father's garden, dormant and brown in October but structured, built to come back. How much? I said. Patricia will give you an exact figure. My estimate, from what I could document, is between $400,000 and $600,000 over 10 years. $400,000 to $600,000. Yes. And the clients. There's more. He laid out a different kind of documentation, emails, meeting notes, a timeline. 6 of the consultancy's 8 largest accounts, cross-referenced against the dates I had personally introduced each client to Charles, and the dates the consultancy first engaged them. Joanna Hale, I said, reading. I introduced her to him at the Hartwick Conference in 2017. Yes. Raymond's firm. I sent him because Raymond asked me who I trusted. Yes. I built his client base. 6 of his 8 largest. Yes. He stood up at that dinner and gave a speech about everything he'd built. His sacrifice. The clients who believed in him. Yes. He built it with my money, my contacts, and my credit. Yes. I sat with the papers spread across the table and felt the specific, cold clarity of a woman who has been good at her job for 16 years, looking at a structure she should have recognized years ago, seeing it completely and unmistakably for the first time. How long have you known? I asked again, because I needed to hear the whole shape of it. About the entities, 7 months of documentation. The client pattern, I started to see it about 4 years ago. The full picture took time to prove. 4 years. Yes. You watched for 4 years. I watched, and I waited, and when I retired and had the time, I documented. And you sat in a parking lot last night. Yes. For 3 hours. Yes. Waiting for him to. Waiting for you to be ready, he said. I needed you to see who he was for yourself, without any version of events he could talk you out of afterward. He paused. I'm sorry it happened the way it happened. I'm sorry about the room and the glass and the 30 people. How long were you going to wait? If the dinner had gone fine, if nothing had happened. I had a meeting arranged with an attorney for the following Monday. I was going to ask you to come. So either way this week. Either way this week. I waited as long as I could stand to. I looked at the documents. What happens now? Patricia, he said. She's expecting your call this morning. I picked up the phone. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I want to take you somewhere that isn't in the envelope, because you should have it before you meet Patricia, before any of the machinery of the case starts turning. I want to tell you how I fell in love with Charles Reeves, because if I don't, you're going to spend the rest of this story wondering what kind of woman marries a man like that, and I'd rather you understand than wonder. I met him at a fundraising gala 14 years ago, back when I was a senior analyst at a firm downtown, and he was 2 years into building the consultancy on nothing but nerve and a very good suit. He found me at the bar arguing mildly with a man from private equity about whether a particular acquisition had been priced correctly, and instead of joining either side of the argument, he asked a single question that made both of us stop and reconsider our positions. That was Charles. He didn't need to be right. He needed the room to notice that he'd been the one to ask the right question. He courted me the way he did everything. Attentively, precisely, with an instinct for exactly what would land. He remembered which wine I'd ordered on our second date and had a bottle of it sent to my office on a Tuesday for no occasion at all. He asked about my father's work with a genuine seeming curiosity that I now understand, looking back, was the first time he was ever casing anything. He told me, 3 months in, that he'd never met anyone who made him want to be better at his work, and I believed him because I wanted it to be true, and because it was, for a while, true. We were married in my father's garden, of all places, in the last week of September, under a small white tent he'd rented and set up himself over 2 days, refusing every offer of help, because he wanted it to be right, and he didn't trust a rental company to understand what right meant for his own daughter. I remember Charles at the altar, watching me walk toward him across grass. My father had receded that spring specifically for the occasion, and I remember thinking, with the complete and uncomplicated certainty you're only ever allowed once or twice in a life, that I had found the safest place I would ever stand. My father gave a toast that night that made 40 guests cry, about patience and about waiting for the right season, and Charles shook his hand afterward and said, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear, that he intended to spend the rest of his life earning that toast. I believed that too. I believed it for a very long time, which is, I've come to understand, exactly how long he needed me to. I want to be honest with you about something. There were signs. There are always signs, and the people who tell you afterward that there weren't any are usually the people who haven't looked hard enough yet. In our second year of marriage, I found an invoice from a client I didn't recognize and asked him about it, and he laughed, not unkindly, just easily, and said I didn't need to worry about the plumbing of the business. That was his job. My job was the parts I was good at. I remember feeling, for about 4 seconds, a small cold thing move through me. And then he kissed my forehead and made a joke about my spreadsheets, and the 4 seconds passed. And I let them pass, because I loved him, and because the alternative, that the man I'd built a life with was lying to me in a way I couldn't yet name, was not a thought I had any use for at the time. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that I was not a fool. I was a woman who had been given, over 11 years, exactly the right amount of warmth at exactly the right intervals to keep the cold 4-second feelings from ever adding up into something I had to act on. That is not a failure of intelligence. It is a design. Charles built it the same way he built the shell companies, carefully, and for a purpose, and I only recognized the architecture once my father laid the blueprints out on a kitchen table in October and let the morning light fall on all of it at once. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Patricia Osai had spent 12 years as a federal prosecutor before going into private practice, and she carried that training the way some people carry an accent. It colored every question, whether the subject was financial fraud or what I wanted for lunch. She met me at her downtown office at 11 that morning and spent 2 hours walking me through what my father had built, checking her own understanding against the parts only I could clarify. At the end, she set down her pen. Tell me what you want. I want my name back, my money back, my professional reputation restored to what it was before he used it, and I want him to understand precisely what he built with what he took from me. I can get you the first 3, she said, The fourth depends on how he handles being shown the whole picture. She looked at my father, seated in the corner. Your documentation is the most thorough I've seen from a non-investigative source. 14 months of organized records. You built the discovery file before we even filed. I had time, he said. You had focus, she said, and turned back to me. I want to predict something, and I want you to remember later that I predicted it. Go ahead. Charles is going to move against your professional reputation within 72 hours. He's going to call people you know. He's going to tell a story about the dinner where he's the concerned party and you're the instability. He'll do it because he understands the financial case, if it surfaces, depends partly on your credibility, and he wants to damage that credibility before you can use it. He'll move fast, and he'll be systematic. And when he does, document every contact, every claim word for word. Don't call him, call me. You think it'll happen within 72 hours. I think it's already started. She checked her watch. It's been 14 hours since the dinner. I'd expect the first call to reach your professional network today, possibly this morning. My father, from the corner, said nothing. I looked at him. She may be right. She is right, he said. I know how Charles operates under pressure, and he's under considerable pressure from more than just us. Marcus Webb was at that dinner for a reason. Marcus Webb. He's owed a significant amount of money by the consultancy. He's been trying to collect for 3 months. Charles has been managing him with promises that haven't materialized, and last night Marcus decided the dinner was the moment to make the situation visible. That's why Charles looked the way he did when Marcus arrived. He wasn't surprised Marcus came. He was surprised by the timing. My father's mouth moved, almost a smile, and I don't think Marcus was surprised by what happened either. He was watching. You know Marcus Webb. We've spoken. When? 3 months ago, once I understood what he was. What is he? A man who trusted Charles with a real business arrangement and was deceived. A man who's angry. And approached correctly, a man who can be useful. Patricia said, he approached him correctly. I looked at my father. You've been building alliances. I've been preparing. We'll need Marcus Webb's documentation, Patricia said. Your father's already begun that conversation. She stood and walked us to the door. At the threshold, she stopped and said quietly, Diana, he's had 11 years to build what he built. We've had 7 months to document it. We are not behind. I know, I said. Good. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We walked to my father's car in the lot outside Patricia's building, and I want to tell you about the drive that followed, because it's the drive where I finally understood what my father actually is, underneath the quiet and the tomatoes and the tea he makes whether or not you want it. She predicted he'd move in 72 hours. I said, once we were on the road. Yes. You said she was right. Yes. How do you know? He glanced at me over the wheel, then back at the road. Because Charles made 3 calls from the hotel lobby before he left the building last night. How do you know that? Because I watched him make them. You watched him through the lobby window. Yes. From the parking lot. Yes. While I was in the corridor. Yes. He pulled onto the main road. I sat with that for a block or 2 before I said, Dad. Yes. Were you ever going to come inside? Last night. If it had gotten worse before it got that bad, were you ever going to walk in? He was quiet for a moment. I almost did, once. When? When the music stopped. The pianist. Yes, when the room went quiet, I was out of the car and at the lobby doors. A beat. And then I saw you come out. You were at the doors. Yes. You were already inside. I was at the doors. 1 step. 1 step, he agreed. I looked at the road ahead for a long time before I said what I'd been turning over since the ballroom. You've been 1 step away my whole life, haven't you? That's what it is. Close enough to come. Far enough to let me handle it. Until I can't. He didn't answer right away, which for my father is its own kind of answer. That is approximately right, he finally said. When did you decide where the line was? Your mother told me where it was, before she died. I turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road, the way he does when he's saying something that costs him something to say. She said, close enough to catch her, far enough that she doesn't know she needs catching. He let that sit a moment. I have tried to do that for 27 years. You've done it. He said nothing, which is the closest my father comes to being moved in front of another person. I was 25 when she died, a slow year of hospital rooms that I still, decades later, can call up in exact sensory detail. The particular pale green of the walls, the sound the blood pressure cuff made when it released, the specific quality of my father's stillness in the chair beside her bed. A stillness I recognize now as the same stillness he brought to a hotel ballroom 27 years later. My mother was a labor and delivery nurse for 30 years before the cancer, a woman who had caught more falling things, literal, newborn, still wet things, than almost anyone I've ever known. And I think that's precisely why she understood, better than my father ever could have understood on his own, the specific discipline of standing close enough to catch someone without letting them feel caught. She used to tell me that the best nurses on her floor were the ones who made new mothers believe they'd done it entirely themselves, even when a steady, invisible hand had been an inch from disaster the whole time. I don't remember the exact conversation where she told my father where the line was supposed to be. I wasn't in the room for it. He told me, once, years later, that it happened on one of the last clear afternoons before the medication made most afternoons unclear, and that she'd said it to him the way she said most things in that last year, without ceremony, in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely, as though the most important instruction of his remaining life were simply one more item on a list. I only know the sentence itself, the one he's repeated to me twice now, 27 years apart, in almost exactly the same voice both times, as though some part of him has kept it exactly as she gave it to him, unworn by any of the years in between. I thought about my mother, who I have thought about nearly every day for 27 years, and about the specific kind of foresight it must have taken to say a sentence like that to a man like him, and trust that he would actually spend the rest of his life obeying it. I thought about a little girl learning to ride a bike with her father a half step behind her, always close enough to catch the handlebars, never once actually touching them unless she was already falling. I had thought for years that this was just how he loved at a slight remove, watchful, restrained. I understood now, driving home from a lawyer's office with my life in a folder on the back seat, that it had never been a temperament. It had been a promise, kept daily, to a woman who'd been gone for most of my adult life. Close enough to catch her, I said. Far enough that she doesn't know she needs catching. Until she does, he said. And then you're already at the door. He almost smiled. That's the idea. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The first call came at 11:47 that morning. I know the exact time because I'd already started a notebook, following Patricia's instructions. Date, time, name, exact words. Raymond Obi, my first professional mentor, calling from a number I've known since I was 26. Diana, I just got a call from your husband. Tell me exactly what he said. He told me you'd had a significant emotional episode at the dinner last night, that you'd made some accusations and caused a scene, that he was deeply concerned about your mental health and was looking into support options. He asked me to be gentle with you if you reached out, and to understand you might not be in a position to do professional work for a while. Raymond, he hit me in front of 400 people. I left because he hit me. 2 seconds of silence. I see, he said. Then, Diana, do you have a lawyer? Retained one this morning. Good. What do you need from me? A written account of exactly what he said and when. Everything you remember. Give me 20 minutes. He sent it in 18. I wrote the entry. Asterisk call 1, Raymond Obi. 11:47 a.m. Documented, cooperative, asterisk. The second call came at 2:15. Joanna Hale, managing director at Castlereagh Partners, one of the 6 clients who'd come to the consultancy through me. Diana, I got a voicemail from Charles this morning. I want to play it for you before I respond to it. You saved it. I save everything. Play it. She played it. Charles's voice, smooth and calibrated, describing my breakdown at the dinner, my instability. His careful, regretful suggestion that professional contact with me might not be advisable right now. I listened to all of it. Joanna, he slapped me. I know what a breakdown sounds like, Diana. I've been in business 30 years. You don't sound like one. I need to tell you something about how your relationship with the consultancy began. Tell me. I told her about the Hartwick conference in 2017, the introduction, the fact that she'd called Charles because I'd told her to, and trusted me for it. A pause. I thought as much, she said. Did you? I noticed Charles was more effective in meetings when you were there. That things sometimes went sideways when you weren't. I filed it as a dynamic instead of a structural fact. A beat. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. But when the time comes, I may need you to describe how the relationship began. On the record. Call me when you need it. Then, one more thing, Diana, don't delete that voicemail. I'm 53 years old, and I've been in business 30 years. I don't delete things. No, I said. I don't imagine you do. Asterisk call 2, Joanna Hale. 2:15 p.m. voicemail saved. Cooperative, asterisk. The third call came at 4:30. Michael Torrance, who ran a regional logistics company and whom I'd introduced to Charles at a dinner party I'd hosted 2 years earlier. Diana, I don't quite know how to. Charles called me this morning. He said you were going through something and he was worried. I wanted to reach out. What exactly did he say, Michael? That you'd had some kind of episode at your party last night. That you'd gotten upset, made accusations, and he was trying to handle it quietly and get you help. Did he? Yes. He said you might not be yourself right now, and that people who cared about you should be patient. Michael, he hit me at the dinner. He raised his hand and hit me, and I left. Silence. Yes. Diana, I don't know what to say. I believed him. I'm sorry. I called because I was worried about you, and I believed him. I know you did. Diana, what's happening? What is this? Right now, I just need you to document this conversation. What he told you when he called, what you understood him to mean. Of course, whatever you need. A pause. I'm sorry I believed him, even for a minute. You called me first, before you responded to him. That matters. I didn't want to assume. That's why it matters. Asterisk call 3, Michael Torrance. 4:30 p.m. believed Charles initially. Called to check before responding. Cooperative, asterisk. The fourth call didn't come. Not that day. Not the day after. Not for 9 days. A woman named Sandra Park, a colleague from my first firm, someone I'd kept a professional relationship with for 15 years, said nothing at all. I found out 8 days later, through Raymond, that Charles had called her that first morning, and she decided, based on what he told her, that she wasn't sure what to believe, and that caution was the responsible choice. I won't tell you what I felt about that. It's private in a way the legal record isn't. What I'll tell you is that it's one thing to have your husband hit you in front of 412 people. It's another thing entirely to sit at your desk on a Monday morning and understand that a woman you've known 15 years got a phone call about you and decided she wasn't sure what to believe. Both are real. The second one is quieter, and it takes longer to stop hurting. Asterisk call 4 did not come. Sandra Park, status unknown, asterisk. I want to tell you about that Monday morning, the one I keep referring to, because it wasn't a metaphor. I had a scheduled quarterly review that morning with a client I'd worked with for 6 years, a family-owned distribution business with 3 warehouses and a habit of worrying more than their numbers warranted. I almost canceled. I sat in my car outside their office for 4 minutes with my hand on the door handle, doing the same kind of math Renata later told me she'd done in the ballroom. Was I actually able to do this, right now, today? And then I opened the door anyway, because canceling would have been the first domino, and I understood, even that early, even that raw, that I could not afford to let a single domino fall. I walked into that conference room and reviewed 11 pages of quarterly numbers without a single tremor in my voice, flagged a receivables issue that had been quietly worsening for 2 quarters, and recommended a fix they implemented within the month. The owner, a woman named Diane Petrakis, who has never once in 6 years asked me a personal question, said at the end of the meeting, "You seem different today. Sharper somehow. I don't know how to say it right." I told her I'd had an eventful weekend. She didn't push, and I didn't explain, and I drove home afterward and sat in my driveway for a while before I could make myself go inside, because it is a strange and specific exhaustion, holding a room together at 10 in the morning when you'd been struck in front of 400 people 40 hours earlier. I tell you this not because it's dramatic. It isn't. Nothing about that meeting looked like anything had happened to me at all, which was exactly the point, and exactly the thing I'm proudest of from that entire week. Not the notebook, not the calls, not even the 7-to-4 ratio I was already keeping. Just a Monday morning where I did my job well, for a client who needed me to, while carrying something no one in that room could see. There was a fifth call I didn't log as a call at all, because it didn't come by phone. It came in person, 4 days after the dinner, at a small industry luncheon I almost didn't attend and only did because Patricia told me disappearing entirely would read to the wrong people, exactly the way Charles wanted it to read. I was standing near the coffee station when a woman named Priya Anand, someone I'd known professionally for years, never closely, always cordially, came up beside me, glanced around to see who was near, and said quietly, "I heard you weren't doing well." "I'm doing fine, Priya." That's not what I heard. She said it with a small, careful smile, the kind people use when they think they're being kind and are actually just being careless. "Charles mentioned you'd had a rough patch. Nothing to be embarrassed about. These things happen." I looked at her for a moment and made a decision I'd been putting off making out loud. "He hit me, Priya, at our anniversary dinner, in front of 400 people. That's the rough patch." Her smile didn't so much fall as freeze in place, caught between two expressions with nowhere to go. He didn't say that part." "No," I said. "I don't imagine he did." I watched her recalibrate in real time, the way you watch a computer redraw a screen. The same information, suddenly arranged around a different center. She didn't apologize, exactly. But she also didn't move away from me for the rest of the luncheon, and 2 weeks later she sent me a short, formal email confirming on request that she'd never had reason to question my professional judgment in 9 years of acquaintance. It wasn't friendship. It was correction, offered late and a little sideways. I took it anyway. You learn, in a year like that one, to take corrections wherever they come from. By the end of that first week, I'd logged 11 calls from professional contacts, plus Priya, plus 2 more I won't walk you through individually because their shape was the same as the others. 7 had called me before responding to Charles. 4 hadn't called me at all. 7 and 4, I kept the notebook. I kept every entry. Patricia had told me I knew how to build a record. I was building one. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The second thing that happened that week, I didn't see coming, even with everything my father had shown me. On the Thursday after the dinner, I tried to transfer money from our joint checking account to cover a payment on my own car, a transaction I'd made 100 times without thinking about it, and the transfer failed. I tried again. It failed again. I called the bank. A representative with a careful, apologetic voice explained that the account had been flagged for a hold requested by the co-owner, pending resolution of what the request described as a dispute regarding authorized use. I asked how much of the account that covered. She told me all of it. $41,000, our joint operating cushion for a decade of shared bills, frozen behind a request Charles had filed the morning after he hit me. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for a full minute before I called Patricia. "He's frozen the joint account." "How much?" "All of it, 41,000. She didn't sound surprised, which somehow made it worse. "That's a common move, and it's a mistake on his part, not a clever one, freezing shared funds this early. This publicly, right after a documented assault, tells a judge exactly what kind of case he's planning to run. I'll have an emergency motion filed by end of day requesting release of half the funds pending resolution, plus sanctions language for using the freeze punitively. What do I do until then? Do you have access to money that isn't in that account?" I thought about it, sitting there, and understood something for the first time with a clarity that had nothing to do with fear. "I have my own accounts, my retirement, my name only. He never touched those because he never needed to. He had a whole architecture built out of accounts I didn't know existed instead." "Then you're not in the position he's hoping you're in," Patricia said. "He's counting on you feeling cornered enough tonight to call him, or worse, to call Marsh directly and try to negotiate your way out of a bind he manufactured. Don't do either. Use your own funds. Document the freeze, the exact hour it happened, and the exact bill it was designed to make you miss. And Diana, this is good for us. Frightening and good for us at the same time. Both of those things can be true. They were both true. I paid the car payment from an account with my name alone on it, and I sat afterward in my kitchen with the specific, disorienting sensation of being financially attacked by a man I had loved for 11 years, and being, for the first time in my adult life, entirely unsurprised by my own competence in response. The judge released half the funds within 9 days, with language in the order specifically noting the timing of the freeze relative to the incident at the anniversary dinner. Patricia, read me that paragraph over the phone, slowly, the way you read someone good news you want them to actually hear. He handed the judge a timeline, she said. He does that, I told you he would. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I should tell you, somewhere in here, what that stretch of months actually did to my body, because the notebook and the settlement documents will tell you what happened to the case. But they won't tell you what happened to me, and I think you deserve both. I stopped sleeping past 4 in the morning sometime in November, and didn't sleep past 4 again until the following spring. I lost 11 pounds I hadn't meant to lose, not because I stopped eating, but because my body seemed to have quietly redirected the energy it used to spend on appetite toward something else. Vigilance, maybe, or the specific low hum of a person waiting for the next piece of bad news to arrive by phone. I developed a tightness in my chest that a doctor eventually told me, after an entirely unnecessary but understandably cautious round of tests, was not my heart at all, but simply what 8 months of sustained fear does to a body that has nowhere else to put it. I want to tell you this not for sympathy. I've had enough of that offered to me since, and it's kind, but it's not really what I need from you, but because I think stories like mine sometimes skip this part, the unglamorous cost of surviving something, in favor of the parts that look good on the page. The truth is that competence and suffering ran side by side through that whole year, not one after the other. I built a legal case and lost sleep in the same 24 hours most days. Both were real. I want you to know both were real. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. There was a Wednesday afternoon in the second week when I drove to my father's house unannounced, not in crisis, not carrying a new document, just needing to be in a room that felt solid and not knowing how to say so directly. So I rang the bell instead. He opened the door, looked at me and said, "Come in." He made tea I didn't want and set it in front of me anyway, and we sat at his kitchen table. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing specific." "All right." We sat with our tea. After a while I said, "Sandra Park." "Raymond told me." "She's known me 15 years, and she decided she wasn't sure." He made several calls that morning. Sandra was one of 4 who didn't call you first. You know the others. I have them in the notebook. I know you do. He turned his mug a quarter turn on the table. It's different from the financial documentation. I can read entities and reconciliations, but Sandra, I stopped. He waited. He made one phone call, and 15 years turned into asterisk, not sure asterisk. "That is what he does," my father said. "It's what he's always done. He builds a version of you in other people's minds so he can alter it whenever he needs to. He did it with his client's perception of the consultancy for years. He did it with your professional contacts the moment he needed to. He met my eyes. It's a genuinely effective skill. That doesn't make it less wrong. How do you fight that? You don't fight it, you outlast it. The version of you he built in Sandra's mind is made of one phone call. The version that actually exists is made of 15 years. The 15 years will outlast the phone call. It always does. But it takes time, and it isn't comfortable while you wait. No. Diana, can I tell you something? Yes. You're the most effective person I've ever watched do difficult work. Not because you're fearless, you're not fearless. Because you don't let the fear run the strategy. You feel it, and you keep working. I know. I know you know, I said it anyway. He refilled my tea without asking. What do you need this week? A meeting with Patricia and Marcus Webb. He studied me. You want to talk to him directly. I want to see what he has, not just what you've told me about it. All right, I'll arrange it. A pause. He is not a sympathetic man. I don't need him sympathetic. I need him useful and honest. He's both on his better days. Then let's make sure it's one of them. My father almost smiled. I'll call him. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Before that meeting happened, Renata called and asked me to meet her for coffee, and I want to give you that hour, because it's the one place in this whole story where nobody was building a case or predicting anyone's next move. It was just two friends, one of them still ringing faintly like a struck bell 3 weeks after the fact. We sat in the back of a place we'd gone to for years, and for a while we talked about nothing, her daughter's college applications, a book she'd abandoned halfway through, the weather turning. Then she set her cup down and said, I need to tell you what I saw, not what I've told other people I saw, what I actually saw. Tell me. I saw his face before he did it, she said. That's the part I haven't told anyone. Everybody talks about the slap, the glass, what he said after. Nobody talks about the 4 seconds before when you said something to him, I couldn't hear what, and his face went completely still. Not angry yet. Still, like something behind his eyes had made a decision and was just waiting for the rest of him to catch up. She turned her cup a quarter turn, the same gesture my father makes without knowing it's the same gesture. I've seen that look before, Diana, not from him, from someone else a long time ago, someone I don't talk about anymore. I recognized it before I understood what it meant, and by the time I understood, it was already happening, and I didn't move fast enough. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. You stood up for me in that room, loud enough for 3 tables to hear. That's not slow. It's slow compared to what I wish I'd done. What did you wish you'd done? I don't know, something with my body between you and him, something a friend does in a movie. She almost laughed without much humor in it. In real life, you just stand there for 4 seconds doing math about whether it's really happening, and by the time you finish the math, it's already over. I did the same math, I said. I've been doing it for 11 years. I was just slower at it than you. She looked at me for a long moment. What are you going to do? Everything, I said. Slowly, correctly, with my father's help. Good, she said. I'll do anything you need. Depositions, declarations, character letters, whatever it is, I mean that. I know you do. She squeezed my hand once hard, the way you squeeze something you're afraid might slip. I should have moved faster, she said again, quieter. You moved, I said. That's more than most of the room did. Let it be enough, Renata. I need it to be enough, because I'm going to need you standing exactly where you're standing for the next 9 months, and I can't have you spending that whole time apologizing for 4 seconds in a ballroom. She nodded, wiped under one eye with the side of her finger, and changed the subject to her daughter's college essay. And I let her. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a friend who showed up for you is let the conversation move on before she drowns in the part where she thinks she didn't show up fast enough. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Marcus Webb had the look of a man who'd spent several months angrier than was comfortable and had finally decided to do something about it. 51, solid, the specific quality of someone who builds things and trusts what he builds, and who was currently learning that one of the things he'd built sat on a foundation he hadn't known was there. He sat across from us at Patricia's conference table 2 days later and looked at me like a man deciding whether I was worth cooperating with. You're the wife. I'm the financial analyst. He looked at me a moment longer. Your father said you'd say something like that. He put a folder on the table. $380,000. I put it into a joint venture with the consultancy 18 months ago, a regional campaign account. Charles had the client, I had the distribution infrastructure, 50-50 on revenue. He tapped the folder. In 18 months, I've received $12,000. What does the contract say? That's where it gets interesting. He pulled a page free. The contract references a specific client account as the basis for the revenue split. 3 months ago, I found out that account isn't the one the consultancy actually billed. He wrote a different client into your contract than the one he actually invoiced. Yes, which means when I try to collect against the client named in my contract, they've never heard of a joint venture because they're not in one. A different client is, one never named to me. So you have no legal claim on the revenue that was actually generated because you have no contract with that client. And you have a contract with a client who has no record of any arrangement at all. Correct on both. It took 3 months to understand what happened, he said, and another month to find your father. He glanced at my father. He found me, technically. I wasn't going to cooperate at first. No, my father said. He came to my office. I told him I wasn't interested in being part of someone else's divorce. Marcus's jaw tightened. He left. I called him back 3 days later. Why? I asked. He looked at the folder a moment before answering. Because I went home that night and read the contract again, side by side with the invoice records, and I understood for the first time the whole shape of what he'd done, not just to me, the structure of it. A man who builds something that elaborate doesn't build it once. He builds it over and over. It's a system. He looked at me. I figured you had a system too. I wanted to see if it was better than his. What did you conclude? He looked at my father. You have better backup. My father said nothing. I looked at the folder. Are you willing to give us everything? In exchange for what? Standing in the financial proceeding, Patricia said, sufficient to recover what you're owed. That's all. It's not a small thing. Marcus looked at the folder a long moment. He used me the way he uses everything, a resource with a value and a shelf life. He slid the folder across the table. Yes, take it all. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Catherine Webb called me herself, a week after that meeting, and I hadn't expected to hear from her at all. I knew her only as a name from the ballroom, asterisk someone should go after her asterisk, and as Marcus's wife, a woman I'd never spoken to directly. I hope this isn't strange, she said when I picked up. Marcus doesn't know I'm calling. It's not strange. What can I do for you? Nothing, really. I've been the one at the dinner table hearing him work through what happened to the two of you, for months now, and I wanted to tell you something he probably wouldn't think to say himself, which is that he respects you. Genuinely. He came home from your meeting and told me you were the first person in this whole business who'd made him feel like less of a fool for trusting Charles in the first place. That means something to me. Thank you. There's another reason I called, she said, and her voice changed slightly, went more careful. I wanted you to know you're not the only woman in this who's been managing something quietly for a long time. Marcus isn't Charles. I want to be clear about that. But I've spent 20 years married to a man who needs to be the smartest person handling every problem, and there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes with watching someone you love find out, in public, that he wasn't as smart about something as he believed he was. I imagine you know a version of that exhaustion better than almost anyone alive right now. I do. I just wanted to say I saw you. In the ballroom before you left. I was 3 tables back. I saw your face in the 2 seconds before you turned toward the door, and I have thought about it more than I've told Marcus, because I didn't know how to say it to him without it turning into something about us instead of something about you. A small, rough laugh. So I'm saying it to you instead. I saw you. I'm sorry it took me a phone call 3 weeks later to say so. You didn't owe me anything, Catherine. I know, she said. I wanted to say it anyway. We talked another few minutes, about nothing important, and when we hung up I sat for a while with the specific, unexpected warmth of being seen by a stranger who had no obligation to look. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The forensic accountant Marcus's documentation led us to was a quiet, precise man named David Okonkwo, and I want to give you the afternoon he walked Patricia, my father, and me through the full trace of the 3 entities. Because it's the moment the case stopped being a story I understood emotionally and became a structure I understood completely. The way I understand any structure once I've seen the underlying ledger. He'd laid the entities out on a whiteboard, arrows connecting accounts to accounts, dates stacked beside dollar amounts. What your husband built, he said, and then paused and corrected himself, glancing at me. What Mr. Reeves built is not unusual in its mechanics. Diversion structures like this exist by the thousands. What's unusual is the discipline. Most people who do this get greedy in year 3 or 4. They take too much, too visibly, and it collapses under its own weight. He never did. He took consistently, modestly relative to the whole, for a decade. That kind of restraint is rare. It suggests someone who understood, at some level, that the structure only survived as long as no single withdrawal was large enough to demand an explanation. He was patient, I said. Patient and disciplined, and I'll say this once, and then I'll go back to being an accountant instead of a psychologist, frightened. Structures like this are usually built by people who are more afraid of being seen as a failure than they are attracted to the money itself. The money's almost incidental. It's evidence of not failing. I've traced 11 of these in my career. It's always the same underlying fear, dressed up in different spreadsheets. My father in the corner said nothing, but I saw something pass over his face, not surprise, recognition. He told me the same thing, in different words, weeks earlier, sitting at his own kitchen table. Asterisk, he builds a version of you in other people's minds that he can alter when he needs to. Asterisk, Mr. Okonkwo was describing the same architecture from the inside instead of the outside, and the two descriptions fit together like the last two pieces of something I hadn't realized was still missing a corner. Marcus signed his formal declaration that same afternoon in Patricia's office, in handwriting I noticed was smaller and more careful than I would have guessed from a man his size. "I want this on the record exactly the way it happened," he said, sliding it across the table. "Not softened, not diplomatic, exactly what he did to me in my own words with my name on it." He looked up at me. "I told Catherine I was doing this," she said. "Good." Renata gave her own declaration 2 days after that, a shorter document, 4 pages, describing what she'd seen and heard in the ballroom, including the 4 seconds before the slap that she'd told me about over coffee, the ones she said nobody else was talking about. She read it out loud to me over the phone before she signed it, her voice steady until the last paragraph, where it caught once, briefly, on the sentence describing my face in the 2 seconds before I turned toward the door. "I want it exactly like that," she said when she'd finished. "Every word." "It's exactly like that," I told her. "Thank you. Don't thank me for telling the truth, Diana. Thank me when I've actually made up for being slow." "You have," I said, and meant it, and I don't think she entirely believed me, and I understood that some debts a person keeps paying long after the person they owe has stopped keeping score. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I need to take you somewhere you weren't, because I didn't understand the full weight of what was happening to Charles until Brendan told me about it, weeks later, on a phone call he made, because he needed to put something down and didn't know where else to put it. It was the Thursday before the dinner, 5 days out, 11:30 at night. Everyone else had gone home. Charles was still in his office. He'd been on the phone most of the evening, not his usual calls, the client calls, the managed calls, but a different kind. Quieter, shorter, the kind where you hear the end of a sentence, then silence, then one word from the other end. Brendan, finishing a project at his own desk outside, heard the tone of it without hearing the words, and the tone had the quality of something not going the way it was supposed to. At 10:30, Charles called him in. "Saturday night," he said. "Who's coming that I haven't personally confirmed?" Brendan ran through the list, clients, colleagues, and named Marcus Webb. Who invited Marcus Webb? He called the office 3 weeks ago, said he was an associate of yours, heard about the dinner. I assumed. "He is not coming. I'll call and—" "Do not call him. Do not confirm or deny. Do nothing." Charles looked at the food on his desk, mostly untouched, and then at the phone. "The speech. Do you have the draft?" Brendan printed it. Charles read it, changed 2 words, handed it back. "It needs to be perfect Saturday." "It's very good." "It needs to be asterisk perfect asterisk." He looked up. "There are people in that room who need to see something specific, who need to leave believing certain things. About the business. About everything. The business, the marriage, everything." He held Brendan's eyes a beat longer than usual. "This dinner is important in ways that aren't entirely about the anniversary." Brendan told me he'd said he understood. He told me, months later, that he hadn't, not until much later, understood what Charles actually meant, which was that the anniversary dinner was a performance, engineered for a specific audience, designed to stabilize his most important client's confidence in the consultancy at the exact moment Marcus Webb was making noise, and the financial structure underneath everything was under a strain Charles had been managing, with increasing difficulty, for 3 months. The dinner was not a celebration. It was a containment strategy, and I was the centerpiece of it. He stayed in that office until 1 in the morning. He rehearsed the speech. He made notes beside the seating chart, which client needed to see what, at which table, during which toast. Brendan described it as a kind of briefing document Charles had written for himself, specific interactions, desired outcomes, contingencies. And according to Brendan, he spent 45 minutes that night deleting a large number of emails from a secondary account. Not the business account, a separate one. The kind of account people keep when they want something kept apart from everything else. Brendan never learned what the emails said. He only knew the deletion took 45 minutes, and that when Charles finally came out of his office, he had the look of a man who has done everything within his power and is now entirely dependent on things unfolding the way he's arranged for them to. He said goodnight. He went home. He got into bed beside a wife who'd been asleep 2 hours and who had no idea about the deletions, or the briefing document, or the real reason the dinner was happening at all. I would find out Saturday night. I'd find out the rest of it much later. I'm telling you this now because the story is more honest with it in it. A man alone in an office at 1 a.m, deleting emails, rehearsing a toast, trying to build an evening sturdy enough to hold together long enough to do what he needed it to do. He wasn't evil in that office. He was desperate. And desperate men do desperate things, and then they go home and lie down next to the people they've been deceiving, and tell themselves that if Saturday goes well, everything stabilizes and they sleep. Charles slept. Saturday came. Saturday did not go well. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. There's a piece I need to give you now, because Patricia gave it to me about 10 days after we hired Marcus Webb's forensic accountant to trace the entities in full, and it changed how I understood everything that had come before it. It wasn't only money. Reeves Capital Holdings LLC, the first shell, the oldest one, had, 4 months before the anniversary dinner, closed on a property. A small lake house 2 hours north, cash purchase, title held solely in Charles's name through the LLC. Not disclosed to me. Not mentioned once, not in a single conversation, not even the vague, deflecting way people mention things they don't want examined. Patricia laid the closing documents in front of me the way my father had laid out the entity filings, in order, letting me look before she spoke. 4 months ago, I said. 4 months ago. I did the arithmetic that didn't need to be done out loud. 4 months before the dinner was 2 months before Charles started closing the emails on the secondary account, was roughly the same window Brendan described as the beginning of the difficult few months Charles had blamed on me in front of 412 people. He was already leaving, I said. I believe so, Patricia said. I believe he intended to file for divorce on his terms at a time of his choosing after establishing, through people like Raymond and Joanna and Michael, a narrative in which you were the unstable one and he was the patient, long-suffering husband finally protecting himself. The lake house wasn't a retreat. It was a landing site, somewhere to go once the narrative had done its work, and the marital estate had been quietly thinned out from underneath you for years. I sat with that for a long moment. The dinner wasn't just containment for the clients. No, Patricia said. I think the dinner was supposed to be Act 1 of the story he was going to tell everyone about why the marriage ended. A beautiful anniversary. A wife who embarrassed herself in front of everyone he respected. A husband who bore it with grace. He needed that scene, Diana. He just needed you to provide it on cue and quietly, and he'd built years of careful invisibility to make sure you would. Instead, he provided it himself. Instead, Patricia said, and for the only time in the entire case, I saw something close to satisfaction cross her face. He lost his patience for 1 second, in front of 412 witnesses, and wrote the first page of our case for us. I looked at the lake house photographs, dock, dark water, a shed he'd apparently already started clearing out. I thought about 11 years, and $68,000 of my own money spent on a party that was never, even from the very beginning, actually for me. I want that house included, I said. It will be, Patricia said. It's the cleanest piece of evidence we have that none of this was recoverable the way he's going to claim it was. He wasn't caught doing something reckless in a moment of anger. He was 4 months into an exit plan when he raised his hand to you. That distinction matters enormously to a judge. I nodded. I didn't cry, which surprised me a little, sitting there. What I felt instead was something more like the floor settling under a building that had been standing, unnoticed, on a slight and permanent lean. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Patricia was right about every move Charles made after that. She'd predicted the smear campaign, and it had arrived on day one, exactly as she described. She predicted he'd retain Gideon Marsh, aggressive, expensive, more high-asset divorces to his name than most attorneys in the county, and Marsh signed on by day 3. She predicted Marsh would file early and broadly, hoping to split her attention across enough motions that something would slip. He filed 4 in the first 2 weeks. She predicted one of those motions would be an emergency petition for a psychological evaluation of me, on the grounds that my behavior at the dinner suggested instability. She predicted it 2 full weeks before Marsh filed it. When it came, I called her. "You knew. I told you he's a one-trick attorney. The trick is always the same, make the other party look unstable. It's his opening move in every high-asset case he's ever run. What do? We comply with the evaluation. We request our own choice of evaluator, and we hand that evaluator 14 months of documentation showing a woman managing a complex financial deception with increasing clarity and precision, while simultaneously running her professional practice and building a legal strategy. A woman doing all of that," Patricia said, "is not emotionally unstable. The evaluation will say so. Trust the evaluation." I want to tell you what the evaluation actually was, because I don't think you understand yet how frightening those words are. Asterisk emergency petition for psychological evaluation asterisk, until you've had to sit in the waiting room for one. The evaluator's name was Dr. Feld, a clinical psychologist with a small office on the 9th floor of a medical building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. I arrived 20 minutes early, the way I arrive everywhere, and sat in a beige chair across from a stack of magazines nobody reads, and thought, for the first time since October, a specific and frightening thought. Asterisk, what if he's better at this than I am too? Asterisk. That's what Marsh was counting on, I realized, sitting there. Not that I was actually unstable. That the terror of being examined for stability in a small room by a stranger with a clipboard would make me perform something that looked like instability, simply because fear does that to people. It is a very efficient kind of trap. You don't have to prove someone is broken. You only have to put them somewhere frightening enough that fear does the work for you. Dr. Feld called me in. She was maybe 60, unhurried, with the specific quality of someone who has heard every kind of lie a person can tell under pressure, and has stopped being impressed by any of them. "Tell me about the night of the dinner," she said. I told her, plainly. In order, I did not editorialize. I did not perform grief for her, and I did not perform composure either. I simply told her what had happened, the way I would have told an auditor what had happened to a discrepancy in a ledger, because that, I realized partway through, was the only voice I actually trusted myself to use in that room. "And in the month since," she said, "how have you been managing your professional obligations?" I told her about the notebook, about the 7 calls and the 4, about the entities, the reconciliation, the client timeline, the settlement conference dates already on my calendar. I watched her write, unhurried, for a long time. Near the end, she set her pen down and asked one more question, off the structured list, the kind of question you ask when you already suspect the answer and want to hear it in the person's own words anyway. "MS Calloway Reeves, do you think you're unwell?" I think I was married to a man who spent 11 years building something enormous out of pieces of my life without telling me, and I think finding that out in 1 week would put a crack in almost anyone. I don't think a crack is the same thing as a break. I've been doing my job every day since October 4th. I haven't missed a deadline. I built a filing system for my own divorce the week after it started. I don't think that's what unwell looks like. I think that's what surviving something looks like while it's still happening to you. She looked at me a moment longer than felt entirely comfortable, and then she nodded once and said, "That's all I need." The written evaluation, when it came 3 weeks later, described me. I still have the sentence memorized. As asterisk, one of the clearest and most precise thinkers, this evaluator has encountered in a legal context in over 20 years of practice, asterisk, and found no evidence whatsoever of the instability alleged in the petition. Marsh dropped the approach within a week of receiving it, and pivoted to asset valuation, which was exactly the ground Patricia had wanted him standing on all along. I framed the sentence. It's the only document from that entire year I chose to keep somewhere I can see it. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The setback, when it came, didn't come from Marsh directly. It came sideways, the way the worst things in a case like this usually do. Michael Torrance called me on a Tuesday in late February, and I knew from the first 2 words of his hello that something had shifted. Diana, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide what to think of me. Tell me. Someone from Charles's side reached out to me. Not Charles. A man I didn't recognize, said he was consulting for the business, asked if I'd be willing to sign a statement clarifying that my decision to move my account wasn't related to anything I'd witnessed or been told about the anniversary dinner. He implied, not directly, but clearly enough, that continuing to work with certain vendors in this industry could get complicated for a company my size if I made things difficult for Charles in a legal proceeding. My stomach dropped in a way it hadn't dropped once since October. Did you sign anything? No, I told him I needed to think about it, and then I called you because I didn't want to think about it without telling you first. A pause. Diana, I have 40 employees. I have contracts with 3 vendors who also work with people in Charles's circle. I'm not made of the same kind of money your father's got backing you up with. If this gets ugly for my business, I don't have the cushion to absorb it. I sat with that a long moment, because it was the first honest fear anyone in this whole ordeal had said to me out loud, and it deserved to be treated like what it was instead of brushed past toward the outcome I wanted. Michael, I'm not going to tell you this is nothing. It might cost you something. I can't promise you it won't. I took a breath. What I can tell you is that Patricia has already documented an attempted witness intimidation, which is a very different and much more serious problem for Charles than a lost client ever was. If you're willing to tell her exactly what that man said to you, in your own words, it stops being a threat against you and starts being evidence against him. Silence on the line, long enough that I thought I'd lost him. Okay, he finally said. Okay, I'll call her today. But Diana, I need you to know I almost signed it. I sat with that piece of paper for 2 hours before I called you, and there was a version of that afternoon where I signed it and never told you at all, and you'd never have known the difference. But you didn't. No, I didn't. That's the only part I need to know, I said. The 2 hours don't matter, the call does. He gave Patricia a sworn statement 3 days later describing the approach in detail, down to the man's exact words. Marsh withdrew 2 more motions within the week, not because of Michael's statement alone, Patricia told me later, but because it signaled, unmistakably, that anything Charles's side tried outside the 4 corners of the courtroom was now going to end up documented inside it. It was the last hard swing either side took before the case settled into the long, grinding shape it would hold for the rest of the winter. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. There is one more call from that period I want to give you, because it's the only time in this whole story that Charles ever told me something true. It came in early March, after Michael's statement, after the psychological evaluation had failed him, after 4 clients had already quietly gone. He called from a number I didn't recognize, a burner or a borrowed phone, and I almost didn't answer it. I answered it anyway. Don't hang up, he said. Please, I'm not calling about the case. I know you can't talk to me about the case. Then what? I wanted to say something to you that I can't say through Marsh, because Marsh would tell me not to, and for once I want to say it anyway. A long breath on the line. My father built a hardware store into 4 hardware stores and lost every one of them by the time I was 19, because he could never stop taking risks he couldn't afford in order to look, to everyone in that town, like a man who was winning. I grew up watching people who'd known him 20 years cross the street so they wouldn't have to be polite to him about money he owed them. I told myself, watching that I would never let anyone see me the way that town saw my father. Never, whatever it cost. Charles, I know what I did. I want you to know that I know. I built exactly the kind of failure my father built, except I hid mine well enough and long enough that nobody got to watch me lose the way I watched him lose. I thought that made it different. It doesn't make it different. It just made it slower, and it made it yours instead of just mine. His voice cracked once in a way I'd never heard it crack in 11 years. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I don't think there's a version of forgiveness that fits what I did. I just needed you to know it wasn't nothing to me either. That some part of what I felt for you, in the beginning, was real, even if I built a lie on top of it so carefully that you couldn't find the real part anymore. I'm not sure I could find it anymore most days either. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment, in my kitchen, in the specific quiet of a house that used to be ours and was now just mine. I believe some part of it was real, I finally said. I believed it for 11 years, which is either very foolish of me or a testament to how good you were at building things that hold weight before they collapse. I don't know which, maybe both. I took a breath. But you didn't call me tonight to apologize, Charles. You called because Marsh has run out of moves and you're frightened, and for the first time in this whole thing, there's no strategy left for you to hide the fear inside of. I understand that fear. I've been living inside a version of it since October. I'm not going to hold your hand through yours. I know, he said quietly. I know that's fair. Good night, Charles. I hung up and I did not cry, and I want you to understand that not crying wasn't a triumph. It was just where I was, by March. A woman who had grieved so much of what that marriage was, in small installments over so many months, that there wasn't a fresh well of it left for a phone call at 9 at night from a burner number. Grief, it turns out, has a bottom. I had already reached mine, months earlier, sitting at my father's kitchen table with an envelope open in front of me. Everything after that was just paperwork. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The deposition of Joanna Hale took place on a Thursday in March, 5 months after the dinner. Patricia scheduled it deliberately late in discovery, after the financial documentation was fully entered, after Marcus Webb's testimony was taken, after all 6 client declarations were filed, because she wanted Joanna walking into a case that was already built, not a discovery tool, a finishing one. Gideon Marsh conducted it, polished, confident, the manner of a man who'd done this so many times the outcome felt predetermined. He moved efficiently through the standard questions toward the substance. He asked Joanna to describe her professional relationship with the consultancy. She described it. He asked how it originated. Through Diana Calloway Reeves. She introduced me to Charles at the Hartwick Conference in 2017. I engaged the consultancy because I trusted Diana's professional judgment. And has your ongoing relationship been based primarily on your relationship with Mr. Reeves? It's been based on the quality of the work, which has been adequate. It's been sustained, in part, by my continued respect for Diana, whom I've known 8 years. And your current assessment of MS, Calloway Reeves, does her behavior at the anniversary dinner give you any concern about her professional judgment? Joanna looked at him for a moment before answering. I didn't witness a behavior at that dinner. I witnessed a man strike his wife. The circumstances of the incident are disputed. They are not disputed by anyone who was in the room. Marsh shifted approach. I understand you received a voicemail from Mr. Reeves the following morning. Yes. In it, he expressed concern about his wife's mental state and the episode at the dinner. Do you recall that? I recall it exactly. I saved it. You saved the voicemail. I save everything. Would you be willing to play it? I'd be delighted. She played it. Charles's voice filled the conference room, measured, calibrated, professionally deployed concern, his careful description of my instability, his regretful recommendation that professional contact with me might be inadvisable. When it finished, Marsh asked, does that characterization match your experience of MS, Calloway Reeves? Not remotely. He wrote something on his pad. No further questions. Patricia said, one question for the record, MS. Hale. In 8 years, have you ever had cause to question Diana's professional judgment, reliability, or stability? Never. Thank you. In the corridor afterward, Patricia said one thing. That voicemail is going to be sitting in the judge's memory at the settlement conference. Men who call their wife's colleagues to describe her breakdown the morning after they hit her tend to lose the benefit of the doubt. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It happened over 8 months. Not a collapse, a sequence. The first to go, formally, was Joanna Hale herself. In that same February, she let the existing contract run its full term because she was a professional and the work had been adequately delivered, and then she did not renew. She called the office to say so. She didn't ask for Charles. She spoke to Brendan, who took the message and reported it up. Brendan called me that same afternoon. Not Charles, Brendan. "Diana, I wanted you to know Joanna Hale isn't renewing. I thought you should hear it from someone who—" He stopped. "I thought you should hear it." "Thank you, Brendan. I'm going to start looking for something else. I thought you should know that too." "I appreciate that. He told us you had a breakdown." "I know. Most of us didn't believe it, for what it's worth. It's worth something." He left the consultancy 2 weeks later, and I want to tell you what happened next, because it's the part of this story I'm proudest of, and it's the part that has nothing to do with a courtroom at all. I called him back a week after he left. "Brendan, what are you doing next?" "Looking, nothing solid yet." "How would you feel about doing the same work you've always done, for someone who tells you the truth about why she needs it done?" There was a pause on the line, and then something that might have been a laugh or might have been relief wearing a laugh's clothing. "Are you starting a firm?" "I'm starting a firm," I said, and it was the first time I'd said it out loud to anyone but my father and Patricia, and saying it made it more real than thinking it had. "Financial advisory, built around exactly the kind of client relationships that got taken from me and put back where they belong. I need someone who already knows how the operational side runs and who I trust." "I'm in," he said, before I'd even finished describing the health insurance. "Diana, I'm in." Michael Torrance called in April, exactly when he'd said he would, and became my second client before I'd even finished registering the LLC. A small, deliberate irony I allowed myself to enjoy for exactly as long as it took to sign the paperwork. Joanna Hale followed 2 months later, not out of pity. She told me plainly over lunch, but because she'd watched me build a case with the same precision I used to bring to her account reviews, and she wanted more of that precision, working for her directly instead of secondhand. By summer, I had a name on the door, Callaway Advisory. No hyphen, no borrowed syllables from anyone else's. A lease on a small office with a south-facing window and 4 employees, one of whom used to work for the man I was divorcing. I want to tell you that building it felt like revenge. It didn't, not exactly. It felt like something quieter and sturdier than revenge. It felt like putting my own name back on the outside of a door, after 11 years of watching it hang on someone else's. I remember the first morning we opened, because almost nothing about it looked the way I'd imagined a beginning was supposed to look. There was no ribbon, no gathering, no toast. There was a moving truck double-parked outside a strip mall office suite at 7 in the morning. A desk Brendan and I carried up 1 flight of stairs because the elevator was out of service, and a sign installer who arrived 40 minutes late and apologized so many times that Brendan finally told him, laughing, that we'd wait exactly as long as it took, because we had, between the two of us, developed a fairly high tolerance for delay. My father came by at 9, unannounced, the way I'd once shown up at his door. He stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at the half-unpacked boxes, the new sign propped against the wall waiting for its bracket, Brendan on the phone already fielding a call from Michael Torrance's office. "It's small," I said, because I felt I should say something before he did. "It's yours," he said. "That's not the same thing as small." He helped us hang the sign himself, standing on a ladder he'd apparently kept in his trunk on the theory that a ladder is one of those things you should never assume someone else has, holding the bracket steady while Brendan drove the screws, and when it was up and level, he stepped back onto the sidewalk to look at it properly. Callaway Advisory, in plain block letters, no borrowed name anywhere in it. "Your mother would have liked this part especially," he said. "The plain letters. She never trusted a business that needed a fancy font to sound serious." "Is that true? Or are you making it up because it's a nice thing to say today?" "Both," he said, which was, I've come to understand, usually his honest answer to that particular question, and I decided, standing on the sidewalk in front of my own name for the first time in my life, that I didn't need it to be only one or the other. It was a nice thing to say, and it was also, somehow, exactly true. Our fifth client came to us in a way none of the first four had, not through my old network at all, but through a cold referral, a woman named Alina Vance, who ran a mid-sized medical practice and had heard about us. She told me at our first meeting, from someone 2 people removed from anyone I actually knew. "Someone told me you're the woman who found $400,000 her husband hid from her in 3 shell companies," she said, sitting across my desk with a folder of her own practice's books. And I thought, that's exactly the kind of person I want looking at my partnership agreement. I hadn't controlled that story leaving my hands and traveling somewhere I'd never sent it, and for a moment I felt exposed by it, a private catastrophe turned into a professional credential without my permission. Then I looked at her folder, and at the honest, slightly frightened way she was watching me, waiting to see if I'd take her seriously, and I understood that the story wasn't mine to protect anymore, not entirely. It had become useful to someone else, a woman I'd never met, trying to protect what was hers before anyone had the chance to take it. I took the folder. I told her I'd have questions by Friday. She was my 5th client, and she was, in her own way, proof that even the worst week of your life can eventually become, at a safe enough distance, something that helps somebody else. The second to go from Charles's consultancy was Raymond's firm, a relationship I'd built over 7 years. They didn't call. They sent a formal notice of non-renewal through their legal department, which is how you end a relationship when you want the ending on the record and not up for interpretation. The 4th and 5th clients left within the same week in March, and Charles never learned exactly why, because neither spoke to him directly. They sent notices. They moved their business. No explanation offered. He called me after the 5th notice, and I want you to hear the call, because it's where I understood that Charles Reeves had left the only space he'd ever really operated well in. He'd built his whole career in the space of narrative construction and impression management. He was somewhere else now, the place where the structure has become visible and the story doesn't hold anymore, and there's nothing left underneath it but the truth of the thing. "Diana." "Charles." "I know there's nothing I can say." I didn't respond. "The business," he stopped. "I know what's happening." "Do you?" "I know who's calling them. I know it's your network. They're leaving because of you." I made 3 calls, Charles. 3. Everything else was their decision. They were my clients. Joanna's known me 8 years. Raymond, 15. Michael came to you through a dinner party I hosted. They were never really yours the way you thought. You borrowed them. Silence. "Diana, the business is." "I know what the business is. I built it. Whatever else happened, I built it." "You built it with my money, my credit, and my professional relationships. You built something real out of borrowed materials. The materials are going back where they came from." "That's not." "Goodbye, Charles." I hung up and sat in my office, south-facing window, the plant in the corner that had needed repotting since spring, and I felt something that wasn't triumph and wasn't quite satisfaction and doesn't have a very good name. The feeling of a thing that had been strained for a long time finally going still. Not victory, stillness, the sound of something that had stopped. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 2 weeks after that call, Michael Torrance asked me to speak on a small industry panel he was organizing, logistics executives, mostly, with a financial advisory segment tacked on at the end almost as an afterthought. And I almost said no, because I hadn't stood in front of a room since the ballroom, and some part of me still flinched at the idea of 400 faces, or even 40. I said yes anyway, because Patricia had taught me, over the preceding months, that the only real answer to fear was to keep doing the thing you were afraid of, correctly, in public, until the fear ran out of new material. I stood at a podium in a hotel conference room, a different hotel, across town, nothing like the Meridian, and I noticed myself noticing that the moment I walked in, and I gave a 20-minute talk on financial due diligence in small business partnerships, using, with the client's blessing, an anonymized version of exactly the kind of structure Charles had built around me for a decade. I didn't mention my name in the story. I didn't need to. Halfway through, I looked up from my notes and saw Michael in the 3rd row, and Joanna 2 seats down from him, and I understood, standing there, that I was no longer being introduced anywhere as anyone's wife. I was Diana Calloway of Calloway Advisory, and the sentence stopped there, complete, needing nothing added to it to make sense. Afterward, a woman I didn't know came up and asked, quietly, whether the case study I'd used was based on something real. I told her it was based on several real things, combined and disguised for confidentiality, which was true, and which was also, I recognized as I said it, the first time I had ever described what happened to me using the careful, professional vocabulary of someone discussing a case rather than confessing a wound. It was a small thing. It didn't feel small. It felt like a door swinging the rest of the way open, quietly, on a hinge that had been rusted shut for a very long time. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The settlement conference was on a Monday in early March, 6 weeks before the final signing. A full-day mediation, both parties present, everything on the table, in front of a retired family court judge named Alina Voss. Patricia had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, by anticipating every move Marsh might make and having an answer already built. She walked me through it the Friday before. He's going to open with a number well below what we're asking. I'd expect him to anchor around 30 cents on the dollar for the identified marital assets, excluding the consultancy entirely, on the theory that your contributions were voluntary investment in a business venture with no expectation of equity return. That's insulting. Yes, it's meant to be. It's an anchor and it's meant to make us reveal our floor by reacting to it. We don't react. We present the forensic accounting, the client timeline, Marcus Webb's documentation, the lake house closing. We let the judge do the math. She tapped her pen once on the table. There's one scenario I want to prepare you for. Charles may try to speak to you directly during the conference, not through Marsh. Is that allowed? Judge Voss permits direct exchanges sometimes if she thinks they are productive. If it happens, I want you to hear what he says and look at me before you say anything back. Whatever he says, look at me first. You don't think I can manage it. I think you can manage it. I want a second set of eyes on it anyway. The conference room sat on the 14th floor with west-facing windows over the city. Patricia and I arrived early and set out our materials. My father wasn't in the room. Patricia had advised against it, and I'd agreed. His presence would be a provocation Marsh would find a way to use, and we didn't need one. We had the documents instead. Marsh arrived with Charles. I hadn't seen him in 4 months, and he looked like a man who'd spent those months managing something that wasn't going the way he'd planned to manage it. The particular exhaustion that comes from sustained pressure rather than one bad night. He looked at me when he came in. I looked back. He looked away first. Judge Voss arrived, and the conference began. Marsh opened with his number. Patricia had called it exactly 31 cents on the dollar, the consultancy excluded on the voluntary contribution theory. Asterisk voluntary contributions. Asterisk Patricia let it sit in the room a moment before she spoke. Thank you, Gideon. She set the forensic accounting report in front of Judge Voss. The contributions weren't voluntary. They were investment, made in reliance on representations documented in these entity filings, which my client's father identified and which we've since fully traced. She laid down the 3 entity filings. The business was capitalized through undisclosed diversions of marital assets into entities created without my client's knowledge or consent. Its client base was built substantially through professional relationships she made available, documented in these 6 declarations. The declarations followed. Mr. Webb's documentation of a fraudulent joint venture contract is here. The folder. And 4 months before the anniversary dinner, funds from the first of these entities purchased this property, held solely in Mr. Reeves's name, undisclosed to my client. The closing documents last. My client did not make voluntary contributions to a business enterprise, Your Honor. She was the enterprise. We're here to return what was taken from her. Marsh said, Your Honor, characterizing these funds as asterisk taken asterisk rather than asterisk invested asterisk is inflammatory, and the property in question is illegitimate. It's also supported by over 400 pages of documentation I've already reviewed, Judge Voss said. Let's set the characterization aside and discuss the numbers. Marsh regrouped and tried a different angle. Your Honor, I'd also note that my client has offered, in good faith, to forego any claim to spousal maintenance he might otherwise be entitled to given the disparity in current earning capacity, following the collapse of his client base. A collapse, Patricia said. Your client engineered himself by attempting to intimidate a witness in this proceeding, an incident already documented in a sworn statement in your own discovery file. I'd be cautious about characterizing that collapse as an act of good faith, Gideon. Marsh's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. He wrote something down and didn't pursue it further. Charles, who'd been looking at the table, looked up. He looked at me. Diana. Patricia touched my arm. I looked at her. She shook her head very slightly. Asterisk not yet. Asterisk. Diana, I want. Charles, Marsh said firm. Charles looked at his attorney. Marsh shook his head. Charles looked back at me and didn't finish the sentence. Judge Voss called a 15-minute break. In the hallway, Patricia said, he was going to try to speak to you directly. Marsh shut it down. What would he have said? I don't know, something designed to make you feel something. It doesn't matter, the documents aren't susceptible to feeling anything. A faint smile. Your father's line. He said it to me the first time we met. Of course he did. We went back in. The conference ran 7 hours. By 4 in the afternoon, Marsh and Patricia were $40,000 apart on the final figure, a long way from 30 cents on the dollar. The anchor had moved. The documents had done what documents do. Gideon, Judge Voss said, you're $40,000 from a resolution. Your client has 3 undisclosed entities, a business built substantially on his wife's professional network, an undisclosed property, a documented attempt at witness intimidation, and a former partner prepared to testify to a fraudulent contract structure. You're $40,000 from none of that ever seeing a courtroom. Marsh looked at Charles. Fine, Charles said. Not asterisk, yes asterisk. Not asterisk, agreed asterisk. Asterisk, fine asterisk. The specific word of a man who has run the full distance of what he's able to run and has nothing else left in his mouth. My client agrees, Marsh said. Patricia looked at me. I said, yes. We signed the term sheet. In the elevator, Patricia said, 40,000. What? He held on 7 hours for $40,000. That's what was left of his leverage. She looked at the descending floor numbers. Men like Charles always believe there's something left to manage, right up until there isn't. Is it over? The hard part is, the paperwork's 6 weeks. The doors opened. Your father called me during the break, wanted to know how it was going. What did you tell him? That we were 40,000 apart. What did he say? He said, asterisk, she'll close it, asterisk. How did he know? He said he's watched you work your whole life. She pushed through the lobby doors. He was right, by the way. I stood in the lobby a moment, then called him. He answered on the second ring. It's done. I know. Patricia told you. She texted when you signed. You were waiting. Yes. Were you worried? A pause. No, I was watching. From where? The coffee shop across the street. It has a window that faces your lobby doors. You were across the street the whole day. Yes. Why did you come up? Patricia asked me not to. She was right. But you were across the street. Yes, a quiet beat. Close enough to catch her, far enough that she doesn't know she needs catching. Dad. Yes. Come for dinner Sunday. I'll bring the wine. You don't have to bring wine every time. I know. He hung up. I looked across the street through the lobby glass and saw a man in a dark jacket rise from a table by the window, pick up his coat, walk toward the door. He didn't look up at the building. He just walked to his car. He'd been there the whole time. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The settlement was signed on a Tuesday in April, 9 months after the dinner, in Patricia's conference room, my father in the corner chair. She set the final documents in front of me, and I read every page before I signed each one, because I'm a financial analyst, and financial analysts read documents before they sign them. Are you all right? Patricia asked at one point. I'm reading. Of course. I finished. I picked up the pen. Patricia, was there a moment you thought we might lose? During the evaluation period, when Marsh filed the psychological request and I didn't know the assigned judge. That was the moment I was least certain. She paused. The evaluation came back so strongly in your favor that Marsh dropped the approach entirely and moved to asset valuation, which was ground we were far stronger on. His own motion produced the best character testimony of the whole case. My father said, from the corner. Yes, Patricia said. Sign the documents, Diana. I signed them. My father stood and walked to the table. He put one hand briefly on my shoulder. Done. Done. He removed his hand, straightened his jacket. Should we get lunch? Yes. We got lunch. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. There was one more piece of mail that spring that I want to give you before I take you to the last dinner, because loose threads matter, and this one had been hanging since the very first week. It came in June, 2 months after the signing. A letter, actual paper, in handwriting I recognized even though I hadn't seen it in years. Sandra Park. Asterisk Diana, asterisk it read. Asterisk I've started this letter 4 times and thrown it away 4 times. So I'm going to stop trying to make it sound better than it is and just tell you the truth. When Charles called me, I let a 15-year friendship lose to a 15-minute phone call, and I've been ashamed of that every day since I found out from someone else, not from you, which is its own kind of shame. What actually happened that night? I told myself at the time that I was being careful, that I didn't have enough information to take a side. The truth is I was being a coward because taking your side felt like it might cost me something and not taking it felt safe. I understand if you don't want to hear from me again. I wanted you to know, regardless, that I know exactly what I did and that I'm not asking you to fix it for me. I'm just sorry. Sandra. Asterisk. I read it twice, standing in my new office with the south-facing window, and I felt something looser and more complicated than either forgiveness or its absence. Something closer to relief that the ledger, after 8 months, was finally, fully balanced. 7 who called, 4 who didn't, and now, quietly, one of the 4 finding her way, late and on her own, back to the truth. I wrote back 3 lines. Asterisk, thank you for the letter. I don't think less of you for being frightened. I think less of people who never noticed they were. Asterisk, I didn't hear from her again for almost a year, and when I did, it was an ordinary email about an ordinary thing. The kind of email 15 years of friendship eventually earns its way back to, one unremarkable exchange at a time. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I want to tell you, briefly, what happened to Charles, because I know you'll want to know, and because leaving it out would be its own kind of dishonesty. He kept the consultancy technically alive for another year, operating out of a smaller office with 2 employees instead of 9, servicing the handful of accounts too small or too new to have heard the full story. Raymond told me, without my asking, that Charles had tried twice to rebuild relationships with 2 of his old clients, offering discounted rates, and been declined both times, politely, in the particular way people decline something when the real reason is a story they'd rather not repeat out loud. The lake house sold at a loss the following spring, folded into the settlement proceeds along with everything else. I don't know where he lives now. I made a decision, sometime around the day the settlement was signed, that it wasn't my job to keep tracking him, the way it had been my job for 11 years to keep tracking whether he was pleased with me. I let that job go. It was, without question, the easiest job I've ever quit. I heard, secondhand, a single detail about him almost 2 years later, from someone who still moved in those circles, that he'd taken a position managing accounts for someone else's firm, a smaller, quieter role than anything he'd have accepted at 35, and that he'd told a colleague once that he wished he'd understood sooner that the thing he'd been most afraid of his whole life, being seen the way that town had once seen his father, had happened to him anyway. In the end, in exactly the room and in exactly the way he'd spent a decade trying to prevent. I don't know if that's true. I wasn't in the room. I only know that if it is true, it's the closest thing to a lesson learned that I ever heard attached to his name, and I found, turning it over, that I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. I felt something quieter, something closer to the sound of a door closing all the way, finally, after months of being left ajar. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 3 months after the signing, on a golden July Sunday, my father came for dinner at my new apartment, the one with the east-facing window. I'd found the place in May, a bright, unremarkable 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building with a temperamental elevator and a courtyard garden the landlord let tenants plant however they liked. And I'd put in tomatoes that first weekend, 6 plants, no more and no fewer. Without entirely noticing I was doing it until my father pointed it out, amused, the first time he saw them. We made lamb chops from his mother's recipe, ate at the table, and afterward he washed and I dried the way we always have, talking about nothing. His woodworking, a new client of mine, the 3 new leaves my office plant had put out since spring. Then he said, in the particular way he says things he's been holding for a while, "I want to tell you something about the parking lot." "Tell me." "I've told you I arrived at 7, when the dinner started." "Yes. I arrived at 7 because I'd been planning to arrive at 7 since January. The dinner was announced in January. I noted the date. I made arrangements to be free that evening." "You planned 7 months ahead to sit in a parking lot." "Yes, I wanted to be there, whatever happened or didn't." He handed me a dish to dry. At 9:30, when I'd been there 2.5 hours and the dinner seemed to be proceeding without incident, I almost left. "You almost left?" "I thought perhaps this isn't the night. I'll come back for the next occasion, whichever one it turns out to be. I thought, Diana's in there, she seems fine, perhaps she's fine." He looked at the dish in his hands, not at me. "I started the car." "You started the car?" "Yes, and then Marcus Webb arrived." "You watched him walk in?" "I watched him walk in, and I turned the engine off. Because Marcus Webb doesn't arrive at an event he wasn't invited to unless the situation has reached the point where he believes arriving is his best remaining option. And a man who's reached that point has decided something is about to happen." He handed me the last dish. 15 minutes later, you walked out. "You want me to know you almost left?" "I want you to know it wasn't inevitable, that I'm not a man who simply knows things and is always right and never comes close to the wrong call. I almost drove away." He folded the towel over the rack. "I didn't, but I almost did. And the difference between almost and didn't was Marcus Webb walking through a hotel door at 9:30 at night." "Dad." "Yes. I know you're not infallible." "Good. You're just there." "Yes. That's enough," I said. "It's always been enough." He put on his jacket. He hugged me at the door. I stood in the doorway and watched his taillights until they disappeared, and then I went back inside and stood in my kitchen in the last of the summer light and thought about all the almost asterisk in my life. The marriage that almost worked. The dinner that almost ended without a mark on it. The father who'd almost driven away. And then I thought about what was true, despite every one of them. He stayed. He was there. He is always there, not because he's infallible, but because he's my father, and that is what my father does. 27 years ago, before she died, my mother told him where the line was supposed to be, close enough to catch her, far enough that she doesn't know she needs catching. I think about that a great deal now, about a man who spent 31 years learning to watch people for a living, choosing, every single day for 27 years, to watch the one person he loved most, and to let her believe, for as long as she could stand to, that she didn't need catching at all. I counted 412 chairs that morning at the Meridian, sure I was building a celebration. I didn't know I was building a courtroom. I didn't know my father was already parked outside, an envelope against his chest, 7 months of patience folded into his jacket like a second heart. He was one step from the door the whole time. He still is.